tonight we're having our finance committee, but first let's pause for a moment of silence and then we'll say the pledge. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'm going to call our meeting to order. Thank you for being here tonight. We do have our committee members here. We have Dr. Reagan and Mr. Brian Alston and Dr. Johnny Hilton. We have Dr. Ora Spann by telephone, and then we have, of course, myself, Cheryl Ray, and we have our support staff, Ms. Jennifer Miller and Dr. Penelope Martin Knox, and Amy Hanson. Oh, who else is there?
Dr. Miller.
Oh, Dr. Miller. I'm sorry, Dr. Miller. How are you? Thank you for being here. Okay, we first of all need to have approval of the agenda. If there's no objections, we'll consider it approved. Any objections? All right, the agenda is approved. And we also need the approval of the consent agenda items. That was our last meeting was November 4th, and the meeting minutes were provided for you. If there are no objections, we'll consider that approved also. All right, so we're down to the superintendent's report. Dr. Martin Knox, you will have your presentation.
Yes, ma'am. So good evening, Madam Chairwoman, members of the Sumter School District Finance Committee. This evening we will do items 4.1 through 4.3 with Ms. Miller, who was so gracious to join us this evening from the Office of Finance as our Chief Financial Officer. So Ms. Miller, at this time, would you go ahead and proceed with 4.1 through 4.3, please?
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, Chairwoman Cheryl Ray, committee members, and Superintendent Dr. Martin Knox. This evening, we have the December 31st, 2021 revenue and expenditures for the general fund. There was a slight increase in the projected revenue related to Revenue Code 1-999, revenue from other local sources. And this relates mostly to the rebate we earn making our payments electronically in accounts payable. The total projected revenue is $127,366,005. Moving down to the expenditures, we are continuing to evaluate salaries and benefits as it is 90% of our expenditures. At this time, based on current staffing levels, we have decreased the overall projected expenditures by approximately $390,000. We will continue to review the projection as we progress through the remainder of the fiscal year, and these amounts will fluctuate. The total projected expenditures is now $129,779,188. Based on the previous information, this would basically have a break-even change in our fund balance.
Okay, I have a question on
Yes,
the
ma'am.
expenditures. 323 repairs and maintenance. What does that cover?
That would be the repairs and maintenance for the district overall. Those would be routine repairs and maintenance that would occur on an annual basis. Those would be items that are not capitalized. Those would be items less than the $5,000 capitalization threshold.
Okay. And we normally use all of that that's allotted.
Yes.
Okay.
May I follow up on that?
Sure.
When you say not capitalized, $5,000 threshold, in other words, if it's gonna be, if the expenditure is gonna, or the item that needs to be repaired is gonna be over $5,000, then it would come from the capital projects budget as opposed to maintenance and repair budget?
Not necessarily. If it ended up being capitalized, it would just have a different account function in the general
Capitalized meaning
fund.
it would depreciate over time?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And it would depend on your government-wide statements versus your fund statement. It's an accounting issue of how it's recorded depending on that dollar threshold. What's put into the capital projects would just be items that have been approved by the board. Just because something does break and cost more than $5,000 does not mean it automatically goes over to the capital project funds.
So
Right.
Jennifer, since you all just had a meeting the other day, Freya, was it yesterday you all met? You want to give an example, when did you all come
I
together?
don't even remember the date.
Just give an example of how that fund is used.
Of the capital project funds. So the capital project funds are, always, a budget is provided to the board for approval, and then the board votes on that, and twice a year we have a capital project fund, for the 8% bonds that are issued, and then I meet routinely with, our procurement coordinator and the executive director of operations and the, director in maintenance, and we review all the projects and get a status update and determine if there's anything that needs to be brought to the board as far as if anything needs to be reconsidered.
So those could be changed if needed.
The capital project's based on board approval if there's a significant change.
All right, ma'am, all right,
Sure.
so we approve the issuance of the bond, and we approve the borrowing of the money. And then, we are presented with a list of projects that would be taken from that money, right?
Yes, sir.
So, does the board actually vote to approve those projects specifically, each item? Or do we just approve the overall, expenditure of the lump of money on capital projects?
You approve both. You approve the dollar amount first,
Right.
and then you approve the actual projects. Once a project is completed, if there is remaining funds, the district does move those funds over to offset a project that perhaps has gone slightly over. But we
Mhm.
make sure the projects that are listed on that sheet that the board approved are completed,
Mhm.
and so that they are done as the board has approved.
So
Well, you-
could, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I hear what you're saying, and I remember back in the day, there was a time when we actually didn't approve the specific projects, we only approved the overall thing, but as time has gone by now, I do recall that we are voting on each of those projects, but we don't vote on if the money is left in this one, do we vote on moving it to another project?
Not when it's a project that's been completed. If it's a project that is decided is not necessary, it is brought forth to the board for discussion.
Thank you so much.
And with that said, Dr. Hilton, good question. We typically bring it to the board for awareness, even though we're moving monies, just so you'll have an understanding of what's happening across the district when we have projects.
So that's money that's left.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay.
We make sure those projects are complete, and so what happens is we bid, or we have an estimate of what the project will cost. Sometimes we come above, sometimes we come under. And if we come above, if there's a project that has come under somewhere else, we will transfer it, just as long as it remains in that function. It will not go from a different account, but it stays within that function. So to your point, it goes a couple of ways, just as long as it's a function of what, give me one of the
It would be
functions.
the 254, which is maintenance.
And so we will change within those parameters, but not outside of, if that makes sense. But we always make the board aware before we make those kinds of adjustments, even though it doesn't have to be voted on, just to make sure you have an understanding.
Thank you.
All right, so going back to the repairs and maintenance, what are some examples of what's considered routine? Because I know I've seen of course, the things in the capital projects, but what are we talking about here?
For example, in my office, I may have a tile that has been destroyed and had water damage or something. The AC unit leaked, or it's gotten old and dingy and falling apart. To replace that would just be a normal repair and maintenance.
Key replacement, windows broken, just the regular maintenance and routine items.
Okay. Also, the property insurance is gone above what was, projected. What's going on with that?
The rates will just come in from Skidsit, after the budget has been formally approved by the board, and so it has gone over. There are also, if you have claims and you have to pay a deductible, that would go into this account as well. So if there's been more claims and a deductible payment has been made, that could fluctuate.
And 550, the vehicles. I know we have some in the capital projects too. What does this cover? Is this?
I would have to look at that. To me, that's something that got added to something that must have, had to come out of the general fund, wasn't budgeted for in capital projects. I don't have the detail in front of me.
Okay, all right.
And so most of the items in the capital were larger trucks, the utility vehicles, the bucket trucks, and some of those
Right,
larger
yeah.
items.
Yeah.
This could have been a repair to a vehicle,
Correct.
something
Okay,
happened,
that's what I was
bumper or
wondering.
something, it could just be a repair.
Okay. All right.
All right, moving on to capital projects. We've talked about that slightly already, but you have funds 519 through 527. And if you have any questions on those, I'll be happy to take those.
I have a question that sort of related. One of our projects we were talking about is we were going to move some portables that were no longer being used. Some of them were to be demolished, some of them were gonna be relocated. I think we tried to sell some, I don't know. What's the status of all those, portables? There were about 3 or 4 different schools, I think. Are they still there? Have they been moved or
All
what?
the above. So, we began the demolition of those items. What the holdup became later on was that, there was a process where we had to have the, units assessed for asbestos or any other contaminant that could have, polluted the air. So we had to go back and have that test done. I believe it was around Thanksgiving time where we began the process. Weren't you, Mr. Reagan? Yeah, weren't you present at one of the demolitions at
Yeah,
Lamar?
Lamar Elementary.
What was that? What was that, around November, right?
Yes, we did one.
So as far as they're all gone. We had some that we had sold, and the individual who sold it, we had to go through legal proceedings just to make sure, because they paid for it but never came to pick them up. So we had sent several letters of notification to that individual to say, if you have not retrieved them by this date, then we would go back and do some other things with it, if you will. They never came back to get it, so we reimbursed them their monies. And we worked closely with legal to make sure that we were not in violation of anything, because they didn't retrieve their property off of our property, if that makes sense.
So what you're telling me is all the portables that we no longer were using are now no longer sitting on our property?
They should all be gone at this time.
And the one that was demolished at Lamar, they came in and tore it down, is that what happened?
Yes, it was not in a condition to be moved, because it was a hazard, because it was in such bad condition, and he could not sell it. So some of them had to be imploded on property, for safety purposes.
They blew it up?
Yes, sir, yes.
Imploded?
I
It
said
fell
imploded,
in.
they blew it up, yes, sir.
Huh. Interesting.
November 18th.
November 18th, and it was around Thanksgiving.
Thank you so much for that information.
Okay, I had a question in the, Fund 527,
Yes, ma'am.
the athletic field and track. What is that specifically for?
That's the 8%. So what we did is, when we received, ESSER funds, we thought that, well, first of all, we did an assessment of needs. And so listening to the community and meeting with others, we recognized that we needed to do some upgrades to our outdoor tracks. Looking at it from an instructional standpoint, I thought that we would have been able to utilize some of the CARES funds to repave, and to get all of our tracks up to standard, if you will. We put it in 3 times?
It was denied.
It was denied each time because it was not directly related to COVID. We actually took it from the standpoint, being honest, that it was for instructional purposes to provide students with space outdoors, for health reasons, because we had just come back from the quarantining, approach.
Social emotional support.
We did it for social emotional support. We tried everything we could do because it's a classroom, it's an outdoor classroom. And so because it was denied each time, when we did the 8% bond, we were looking at monies that we could use from that bond to begin prioritizing, if you will, our tracks so that we can get them paid over the next few years. So that's what that money is there for. Right now, we're trying to see what the cost is. We believe that we just talked about it a few moments ago, coming overbid and underbid. We kind of underestimated what the cost would be to repave those tracks. But that is something that we have been talking about actually for the last year and a half or so. I'm just trying to figure out what we can do for instruction and for our community.
So that was to go towards that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Did I give you a whole bunch of stuff instead of just answering that question?
No, that was good, and that's gonna lead me into, I wanted to see if we could have some sort of update on the Title IX situation and what's been done there. I know we had talked about y'all were gonna work on a timeline and the funding source.
So what we would have to do is we talked about using the next 8% bond to begin to resolve some of the matters that have been brought to our attention and that we've noted and observed. There is already work that has taken place, some of the smaller items like the painting, looking at the dugout. Those larger items like the restrooms, the walls, the scoreboards, the dugouts, those are going to be cost heavy, if you will. And so we talked about looking at the next 8% bond, while still trying to maintain the facilities needs and having a balance between what we do for athletics and what we do for academics. And just trying to satisfy all those things that need to be repaired and replaced. But the smaller items, we actually were able to prioritize some of those things. Let me see if I can pull my notes.
And we did have about $10,000 of funding that we were able to allocate towards the immediate needs.
Yes.
Okay, that went to the schools.
No, it's held at the district level and it's prioritized for Title IX.
Has any money been given to the schools to do some of the smaller things?
We're running that out through our executive director of operations.
So we have staff that's going out to take care of those instead of giving, because all the needs are almost the same at all three of our high schools.
Can I?
Well, can I ask one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
You said the next 8% bond, when is that?
This will be this spring. It will happen in May. It should close in May. We should receive the funding around June.
Okay.
So has anything been done to any of these issues that have been identified as being out of compliance with Title IX?
So yes, we've begun, before the conversation even came up, we had started the work. As I said, we've had someone walk through the buildings and through the fields to look at the needs. And so, for example, adding brick dust to the home plate track area at the softball fields and baseball fields at Lakewood and Crestwood. It's already in place at the baseball field at Sumter High. That was something that we were able to do. The cleanup, the paint in the dugouts, that's been done. They're replacing the rusted Sumter High School softball sign that's outside of the dugout. That work is in progress. All three of the high schools need updated speakers. And so again, when we have these conversations, it's again about balancing needs. So yes, their Title IX matters, but we also have those matters that we have to address that's directly impacting the learning environment. So it's prioritizing which one is going to take precedence, and it's operating with an either or instead of with an and. And so some of those items have been addressed. When we talk about future projects that's requiring attention, and this came from an expert as well, just to give you an idea of some of the things that have to be addressed. The field treatment for the softball field at Lakewood, that one's underway, Dr. Hilton, to answer your question. The concession building and restrooms, that's a larger financial piece, and we have to figure out how to do that with the 8% bond. The Sumter High School baseball has a building that houses a concession, dressing rooms, and storage rooms. Softball players walk approximately 75 to 100 yards to get from one facility to another. That has not been addressed because, again, it's hefty, just like the restrooms and the concession stands. The backstop I believe the backstop work has already begun.
Now, was that one of there were some safety issues with some of these things, or that, I'm assuming those will be the first things.
They
that are
have to
done.
be, yes ma'am, they have to be. And when we talk about the safety, when we're talking about ADA compliance, while we've continued to make sure we're, monitoring our buildings and looking at the needs, we have to take into consideration first the safety issues. So I know that there was an ADA, piece that was brought up, a few weeks ago that was new to me. So we had to send staff out there to look at it because I had not been informed of that before. And so again, just continuing to address all of the needs, while maintaining, appropriateness of the monies as we have indicated, whether it's, the 8%, because in 2000 and I wanna say 17, 18, Jennifer, I don't know if you have that record, but there was a lot of work done around, I wanna say it was 18. There was a lot of work done where the whole 8% bond was used to satisfy some of the athletic needs. And I can call out the schools because I'm looking at the documentation and the work now. It was walls at one of the schools, it was some things at one of the elementary, middle schools. So there was a lot of work done in 2018, utilizing the entire 8% bond to satisfy. And so what we're doing now is, while that 8% bond took care of a lot of the athletic needs, have to take care of the school facilities needs as well. So again, it's operating with the either or as opposed to an and we're just getting the work done as quickly as we can with the financial, specs, if you will, that we have.
All right, so let me ask this, going back to just, regular maintenance and that sort of thing, not just athletics, but the whole, all the buildings. What is the funding for that? Is that just in that one fund that we have in the general fund? And what if something needs to be done, and do we have the money to cover it?
Currently, our general fund, 90% of that is allocated to personnel, salaries and benefits, so we are operating the district on 10% of that 135 million. 5 million approximately is electricity. So right there, you're down to, there's only 5 million, you gotta buy insurance, there's all these, set costs that we have no fluctuation with. We've been operating with, okay, this is what's left over for repairs and maintenance, and we've been deferring maintenance.
So we really can't do that for very long.
Well, here's what, may I? All right, so if we're deferring maintenance, then why aren't we circling back around with the capital projects to tend to these maintenance issues?
That is what several of the capital projects have been allocated for.
Right.
But again, it's the balancing of, this is the maintenance, but these are the needs and desires of other items, and trying to just balance that all out. And not just dedicating it all, you know, there's a need for Chromebooks, so we have to set aside $2 million to buy Chromebooks, because they're gonna go out of service and out of date, so we know $2 million has to be allocated for that, so.
Out of capital project?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I understand. Well,
So instead of us just focusing on one area, what we've been doing is kind of putting them in smaller buckets so that we can address a little bit of everything, as opposed to just addressing one particular area, because the needs, again, are vastly different depending on which school you're going to, what office and department you're talking about, because we're talking about schools. We haven't even taken into consideration the district office and the annex. And so whenever there's something that needs to be done, the annex and the district office are usually the last, because my belief and philosophy is that we need to take care of the place where our children are housed first. Not that adults aren't important, because they are, but that's pretty much, like, for example, prime example, the plumbing.
but deferring maintenance is not a good idea.
No, sir.
It'll catch up with you eventually.
Sure will.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Where is the funding coming from to do this project that's in they're still in their plumbing here at the district? Where are we pulling that?
It ended up being in the capital projects fund. There is a line item that's called other facility needs that we had in there. That's for those type of things, emergency uses, and the board has approved that line item in the issuance in the project.
Thank you.
And it's again, one of those unanticipated costs. We did not expect that. And to your point, we continued to get it repaired, and then it got to the place where it couldn't be deferred or repaired anymore. We had to get the work done.
Okay, any other questions on? Okay.
All right, and then the last thing we have this evening is the minority business utilization plan. This is your semi-annual presentation. This was presented to the board at the last board meeting. Please note that this information is audited on an annual basis by our procurement auditors. And before I go into any of the details, just to give you a recap, the certified minority businesses, small or minority businesses, must be certified with the South Carolina Division of Small Minority Businesses Contracting and Certification. The acronym for that is SMBCC. There are approximately 750 certified minority businesses registered as of December 2021. And it is noted that this was an increase from 50, it increased by 50 from the prior year. And Sumter School District does encourage all minority businesses to obtain their certification with the state. And on our application, our vendor application, there is a section to indicate if a vendor is a minority business and in fact if they are certified, because not all of the minority businesses are certified. And then lastly, semi-annually, we compare our vendor listing with the SMBCC listing of certified businesses to ensure that we've properly flagged all our certified minority businesses, so they're all being properly recorded. Moving to the next slide, all bids are advertised with the South Carolina Business Opportunities. And during the period of July 1, 2021 through December 31st, 2021, there were 0 bids received from certified South Carolina minority businesses. Moving on to the next slide, during the period of July 1 through December 31st, Sumter School District did spend approximately $542,000 with South Carolina certified minority businesses. 98% of that activity was with women-owned businesses, and 2% was with African American male-owned businesses. And then we are currently doing businesses with 5 South Carolina certified minority businesses. And then the projected fiscal year 2022 budgeted expenditures are approximately $129 million, and if we continue to spend the second half of this year as we have in the first, 1% will have been spent with certified South Carolina minority-owned businesses. And at this time, I'll happy to take any questions.
I think we had this discussion at one time, but the certification process, is that cumbersome for the businesses? That's why they don't do it?
Yes, ma'am. That is my understanding, is they're making the decision to not do it because of all the information that has to be submitted. They have to submit tax paperwork, they have to submit documentation. I did just hear last week, perhaps there was some drug testing that had to be conducted to keep up their certification, and so businesses are just choosing not to go through the process, even though they're minority-owned businesses, which we are doing business with, but they are not technically included in this calculation because they're not certified.
Okay. All right, any other questions? Matt? Okay, thank you for the information, Ms. Miller.
You're welcome.
All right, now we're down to recommendations and steps moving forward. I know we haven't met since November, and we had talked one time about the presentation about the salary scales and for the board, and I don't know if that was, I'm not sure we ever got that requested of you to do that, so I'd like to take that recommendation back to the board. If y'all are in agreement with that, to look into the salaries. And then also, if you could I'll ask them to also request the update on the Title IX, so you can explain that to the full board about where we are with that. the situation with, the funds and how you're prioritizing and doing the balance. Okay? All right, is anything else?
What is it exactly that you're looking for with the salary search?
Well, remember,
I think
we
we
had,
talked about that before.
we had talked about bringing somebody in to help. They've got so many different scales. We're gonna bring somebody in to help, but there were some questions about bringing in an outside firm to do it. So they were gonna give us the presentation so we could see the complexity of it, was where we were going with that. So the board would understand, that there's a need to bring somebody in and why. So we can, because she said there's a lot of inequities with the salaries, and it's very difficult to determine somebody's salary, but that's what I understand this,
That's good.
yeah, okay. So it's just, it's not, it could be simplified, but we're thinking that we need somebody to come in and help do that.
So when we say presentation, Dr. Martin Knox is going to bring somebody in, or she just going to address?
Just let the HR come in and just show us, you know, what they're dealing with, I think, so we can understand. 'Cause it's
Show us
not-
what the problems are with it.
Right, you know, you just can't get a sheet of paper and look and say, okay, this is where you would fall. It's a lot more complex than that, and I think we wanna get it simplified. So if that's, y'all in agreement with continuing to look at that, so we can, okay. All right, is there anything else? All right, well, thank you again for being here, and, with that, I guess our meeting will be adjourned at 6:33. Thank you.
Thank you.